Happy holidays and welcome to Parallel Disney, where we find the various anomalies across the Disney dimensions. Today we'll be cataloging the anomalies at the Haunted Mansion Holiday Nightmare in Tokyo Disneyland and the Haunted Mansion Holiday at Disneyland. Before entering the grounds of the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, you will see a full-bodied Jack skeleton on the archway. In Tokyo, you just see his head. Though the mansions are very different, you'll find many of the same decorations, such as the candles, jack-o'-lanterns, the little skulls, and wreaths. The Jack scarecrows are quite similar with fairly few differences. The one at Disneyland has a longer hat, and it goes off to his left instead of the right. His shirt is also less torn up and goes all the way down to the wrists. Tokyo seems to have thicker legs, and his fingers curl more inward. The sleigh in Tokyo doesn't have a crazy list coming out of it with various Christmas equations. Disneyland's sleigh is missing a blade on the back end, and also the blades are kinda different altogether. Both parks have a jack-o'-lantern snowman, but the one at Disneyland is small and is on the opening archway, while Tokyo actually has two and they're much larger, and more sinister. A couple of unique features at each of the parks is how Disneyland has the countdown clock, while Tokyo has this neat jack-o'-lantern tree. An additional unique feature to Tokyo is how the pet cemetery has ingredients in it that were used in the film. In Tokyo, before you enter the stretching room, you'll find the portrait that once had the man that was rapidly aging, now with Jack Skellington. Soon it'll start snowing in the picture, and then everything will start to get covered in the snow. Jack will also transform and be in a Santa suit. The pumpkin in his hand will also change into a present as everything gets thicker in snow over time. Due to there being a fireplace in the foyer, there was an opportunity to hang some stockings. In the stretching room, the portraits are now covered by some stained glass art. There's also a stained glass artwork on the ceiling as well. Tokyo has stained glass instead of the portraits as well. But this time they don't have their dedicated lighting, so they're not quite as vibrant, and the stained glass structure on the ceiling is missing as well. Both mansions have a stained glass window that depicts the mansion that you're in. Due to the mansions being unique style, naturally they're different, but it's a very awesome difference nonetheless. As the room begins to stretch, paintings are revealed behind the stained glass. 3 are identical, but one is unique to each park. In Disneyland, it's the wreath. Tokyo, however, has a scene of Jack riding his sleigh in the night. Something particularly cool in the scene about Tokyo is that there seems to be a cameo of the Disneyland Haunted Mansion. Once the stretching room is fully stretched, in Disneyland we find that the stained glass on the ceiling is actually a screen, as it reveals a face in the broken glass, and we also see Jack and Zero overhead wishing us a happy holidays. In Tokyo, a giant Jack's head is revealed through the ceiling and also wishes us a happy holiday. In Disneyland, in the corridor, we find some changing paintings that are also animated, where you'll find Zero flying around as they switch between Halloween and Christmas themes. The 2 busts that always manage to keep an eye on you have a Ho 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 and Noel Christmas light display. There's also this really freaky sleigh ride sign creature? I don't know. In the loading area beyond the Doom Buggies, there's this grand display of a scary or Merry Christmas diorama featuring many of the characters from the Nightmare Before Christmas movie. In Tokyo, you'll find some projected spider webs, orange lights with additional decorations around them, and some more pumpkin snowmen. Tokyo is longer with a few scenes at the start that are quite unique. First up, there's Jack and Sally up above, followed by a corridor with several pictures depicting many of the characters that can be found in Halloween Land, or Halloween World, Halloween Place, Halloween Town, that's it. In the library, we find Zero enjoying the festivities as well, creating his own floating book Christmas tree. We also see that the busts are slightly decorated with orange lights overhead. In the next room, we find that Sally is being serenaded by the vampiric teddy bear? Yeah, let's just go with that. And there's also a Christmas tree that's fairly reminiscent of the one in the premonition that Sally had. As we enter the next room, we find several bugs in cages that are quivering with fear as they hear Oogie Boogie's cackling going on in the distance. We also find some spiders, but they've been hanging around there already. In the end of the room, we find Oogie Boogie dancing around, but it switches between his silhouette as well as that of a Christmas tree. When starting your journey at the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, you find yourself approaching an archway that is created by gifts and ribbons. You even find that vampiric teddy bear with a spider on a fishing rod, and he's trying to give you a gift. In the next room, we find that it has been decorated with several bones and a few jack-o'-lanterns. Even the knight is getting in on the festivities with his jack-o'-lantern mask, and even a pumpkin's on top of his weapon. Zero is now floating around where the candelabra was, and there's even a bone kind of floating in front as well. As we enter the hallway, we find some singing flora, and we even see that vampiric teddy bear trying a different method. Instead of wrapping his gifts, he seems to be using a hammer and nails. Many wreaths as well as ribbons can be found on doors, and if you notice, they're all connected by a single vine. As we get towards the end of the hallway, we find that that single vine is attached to a giant attacking wreath, and it reaches out to grab you. We find more singing plants, and the wall is completely overgrown. As we enter the scene with the endless hallway in Tokyo, we find that the bones overhead are more in line and organized and a little less messy. The Zero Dog Bowl with additional bones is no longer there, and this time there is a skull on the pile of bones that's on the steps. As we make our way into the hallway and we find the coffin, we see that the teddy bear vampire thing is now on the end of the coffin, along with the tag that says "Do not open till Christmas." The red wreath on this banister no longer has a skull. A unique feature in Disneyland is how the strange little teddy bear is holding onto nails with its teeth. When we get to the man-eating wreath in Tokyo, we find that his mouth is no longer hollow and he doesn't blink his eyes. Before entering the seance room, we see that the clock is gifted to Madame Leota from Sandy Claus with additional presents. In the seance room, we find a Christmas tree made out of candles. There's also some floating lanterns, and there's now tarot cards in place of instruments. Madame Leota is also decked for the holidays, as she kinda has an icicle looking thing going on. While floating around, she is now reciting the 13 days of Christmas. These scenes are what are depicted on the floating cards. There's also this mysterious nutcracker that is chomping around in the foreground. And meanwhile, there's this interesting star of cards in the background. Back at Tokyo, Madame Leota also received a clock with 13 additional gifts. There's no longer the candle Christmas trees or the floating lanterns. The nutcracker is also missing, and there's no longer cards on top of the table, since that has to be occupied by Madame Leota herself this go-round. Where we once saw the star that was made out of the cards, we now see the trick-or-treaters peeking in. Something interesting about the tarot cards is there seems to be two different decks. One has a Madame Leota, while the other one has the Haunted Mansion. For both mansions, it seems like it's the Disneyland version of the mansion that is depicted on the card. I couldn't find a clear enough image to verify this for certain, but if one of you field researchers out there can verify this, feel free to leave it in the comments. What's different though is that at Tokyo, each card has one color, but in Disneyland, they're two-tone, as it's a green on orange or an orange on green. An additional fascinating difference with the tarot cards is how there's this one here that has cards within it. In Tokyo, there's just these 3 cards spinning within the card. In Disneyland, however, it's a bunch of cards that make up a pyramid, or should I say Christmas tree. As we get to the ballroom, we find garland with various purple lights throughout the entire room. We also see that a bunch of gifts are busting in through one of the doors, and some of them are floating through. On top of the dining room table, there's now a gingerbread house. The gingerbread house at Disneyland has a very unique feature, and that is that it changes every year. Where the people are dancing, we find that there's a Christmas tree with several presents underneath, as it is ornamented with various jack-o'-lanterns. There's even Zero floating above. Beyond the curtain in the background, we find that there's a Christmas tree made out of floating books. In Tokyo, the door that has the gifts busting in is much more modest. Instead of having the toys float in, it's just the regular ghosts. The garland now uses orange lights instead of purple. The gingerbread cake is the same year after year. There are no longer wreaths on each of the columns. The Christmas tree is quite a bit smaller. Behind the curtain in the background, we see a silhouette of Jack and Sally. Presumably this is because we've seen the floating book Christmas tree earlier on in Tokyo. In the attic, we see a bunch of gifts lying around. We also see the naughty or nice list as well. Deeper in the attic, we find a Christmas tree that's been made from the rear coil of a snake. There's also a jack-o'-lantern in the box toy. As we see a portrait of Jack and Zero, we see that a snake has made an archway over us and is swallowing the list. At the end of the attic, we see that the Hatbox Ghost added to his collection. In Tokyo, there are fewer gifts all around, but there are more Jack-in-the-Box type toys. When we see the gifts, they seem to both be in each park, including this duck, but this bucket of 8-ball seems to be exclusive to Tokyo as far as I can see. It's a good thing that in Tokyo the basket of dynamite isn't lit. It's a little less festive, however, from Disneyland. As we descend towards the graveyard, we find that bear vampire thing once again. This time it's chewing on some lights. Soon we find ourselves passing by Santa Jack with Zero, who has a candy cane in his mouth. There's even a interestingly wrapped present. It's addressed to Jack, and judging by the wrapping paper, it must be from Sally. In the graveyard, we find that it has also been overtaken with festive holiday cheer. We find Sally with a basket of objects to help Jack in his experiments. The singing bus have been overtaken by pumpkins and are now jack-o'-lanterns. Behind them is that famous mountain that has a little spiral in it. One of Jack's skeletal reindeers is hanging around, and he appears to have a tray in his mouth with 3 teacups. The 2 dining ghosts now have a makeshift chandelier of ice. Now we find ourselves going beneath some angel sentinel jack-o'-lanterns? Whatever they are, they're actually the most freaky things in the mansion, I think. Holiday or not. As we approach the crypt, we find that teddy bear vampire thing playing a trumpet like the sentinels. As we descend in Tokyo, we find that vampire bear chewing on some lights again, but this time there's no sparking fiber optics in its mouth. The trees here have a lot more snow and icicles hanging from them. The Jack here has a much wider and more impressive range of motion here. However, there's a little sacrifice because we see the bar that is supporting him. His sack is also white instead of green, and he no longer has a present next to him. Just like at Disneyland, we find that the graveyard has been treated to various festive decorations. A unique decoration in Tokyo worth mentioning is this fishbone Christmas tree next to the cats. This tree next to the singing pumpkins now has a skeleton decoration instead of a snowflake. Tokyo's mountain also seems to have done a better job at hiding this construction scene. In Tokyo, there is an effort to conceal the hat of this bust that the pumpkin was placed over. Disneyland appeared not to have minded at all. There is no ice chandelier for the diners here. Beyond the various little differences between types of ribbons used and how the lights are more modest at Tokyo, instead of being a scribbled mess like at Disneyland, there's really not any additional things to really mention at this point. Inside the crypt at Disneyland, we find a giant Oogie Boogie animatronic with a wheel of surprise gifts that you may receive. You'll see the gift that you won pop up in front of you at each of the mirrors. However, if you get the question mark, you'll find the various trick-or-treaters popping up at each of the 3 mirrors. As you exit the attraction and make your way up the moving walkway, you'll find a little Sally saying a hurry back as she waves goodbye. You'll also get the opportunity to see Santa Claus fly by the moon. In the crypt at Tokyo, you find the 3 trick-or-treaters hiding in some Christmas presents. As you get to the mirrors, they're no longer outlined by metallic-looking Christmas presents. This time the mirrors have skulls above them and Merry Christmas trick-or-treat signs. The first window is blocked out and covered in spiderwebs, and this is normal operation. And now instead of ghosts, you'll find trick-or-treaters in the doom buggies. You'll also find that the lanterns are now of the Jack-O variety. As we get deeper into the crypt, we find Sally gazing at the moon, and in the moon we can see the silhouette of Jack flying his sleigh with his bony reindeer. In this scene, there's a gift next to Sally on the mantle, while at Disneyland she's sitting on a gift. Thank you for watching this holiday edition of Parallel Disney. If you enjoyed this video and wish to see more like it in the future, please consider subscribing. If there's an attraction that you'd like a future report on, please leave it in the comments. And if you haven't already, check out some of my earlier videos.